Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sirona webinar, the next chapter of radiology reporting. We're going to give everybody just another minute or two, and we will get going. Thanks so much.
I'm going to warn you guys, I'm a little bit caffeinated today. So anybody who knows me well knows that could be an uh-oh situation here, but the energy just doesn't stop. Right, Andrew?
I know it too well, and I got my cup right here.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't know if it's Sirona or the coffee or both.
Right? It's good. It could be a combination of two. Yeah. Can't be stopped, only hope to be contained.
Awesome. Well, we are a minute after JD. Do you want to jump in
Can we
and
see how many
maybe?
folks we have in? I want to make sure we actually got a good quorum here. I can't
Yeah, we got quite the list so
Oh,
far.
excellent. All right. Well, welcome everybody and happy Wednesday. It's can't believe it's midweek already. We get to slide into the weekend. It's morning where I'm at here in Southern California, but afternoon, obviously, if you're on the East Coast. Welcome to our webinar and really grateful that you're taking the time today to join us. It's very exciting to have this opportunity to address such a great group of folks. I think we've seen from our registrations. I think, guys, we've seen everything from to IT people to clinicians to administrators across the board, right? I think it's kind of a cool grouping of folks across the board. We're going to encourage you to ask questions. Certainly put them in the side panel or where the question panel ultimately is. We'll get to questions for sure at the end. We're encouraging as many questions as you can muster, of course. We're really excited to be talking about the next chapter of radiology reporting, and you're going to get a little bit of an understanding of the way Sirona sees the world in the context of the technology that we've been bringing and working on for years, but bringing to market in the last number of years or so in particular. So super grateful again. Thanks for everyone for joining. My name is John Danahy. I'm the Chief Growth Officer for Sirona. I've been in this industry for a very long time, and I'm really excited about what we do. Of course, again, anyone who may know me, I'm easily excitable about things I think that are transformative in our industry. Certainly been the industry's been wonderful to me, and I think to all my colleagues in the context of all this wonderful transformation and innovation that comes along with it. I'm joined by a phenomenal panel of folks that work closely with Sirona. Trafton Drew, just kind of going down the list here. Trafton Drew is going to join us. Dr. Drew is one of our senior product managers and on the innovation team, which I think is really an incredible role and opportunity here at Sirona in particular. But I think you're going to get some great insights from him. Dr. Peter Sachs, one of our radiologists who plays along in the sandbox, makes sure that we stay on the rails, but also is very insightful about the way this user experience comes together in particular. And we're super grateful that Dr. Sachs is able to join. And anyone, again, who knows Andrew's a part of my team. Andrew, thanks again for joining. As always, my friend, you've done a great job here in getting us all together and getting this out into the world. So thanks for that. Quick and dirty. We're going to kind of dive right in, and I always believe in starting with the end in mind. And I think it's really important we lay down some key premise. I think if we all can agree that legacy infrastructure in our industry is part of the core problem I think that's facing radiology today. We'll dig a little bit deeper into what that means specifically, but as we talk about legacy infrastructure, think about legacy systems as well. Workflow improvement for radiologists, for clinicians, is paramount, and that AI's biggest value is in supporting workflow holistically. We're going to really kind of dive a little bit into that as well as we kind of get into the meat of our conversation here. And then this notion that secure, of course, cloud-based delivery can provide significant cost disruption to this industry. Obviously, it must perform in order to be to really fulfill its promise. But this opportunity that cloud delivered technology delivers is not just a technology, it's a disruption in the cost basis of the way that we do things as well. If all that's true, guys, by the way, it's then these legacy business models and the legacy technology that goes along with it can be disrupted. I think a big part of our message at Sirona is there is a new opportunity to look at the business of radiology through the lens of improving physician experience, unlocking new levels of profitability and efficiency, right, that come along with this. So very, very exciting to kind of get into this. And again, if you kind of go along with those arguments, our goal here and our job here is to prove that a lot of this is demonstrable through Sirona's eyes. I definitely do not want to spend any time reminding everyone the challenges our industry faces across the board, right? We do see radiologists burnout continuing even significantly past, the COVID years, if you will. The reliance on teleradiology is a very, very prominent aspect of our industry, and retention and recruitment of doctors and radiologists in particular, it remains to be a massive challenge. But these are all very, very substantial issues. Every single one of these bullets, again, the way we think about this is through the notion that legacy infrastructure, legacy applications, they truly actually inhibit the way physicians will be able to work the way they want to work in the future and the years ahead. And we're already sort of demonstrating a little bit of that today with Sirona's applications. So again, back to this premise of legacy infrastructure and doubling down on that a little bit. When you really dig into this, it's important to understand that when we think about these applications and we think about the hardware that powers them, they're all bolted together and basically, integrated or interfaced through what we think of as fragile integrations and fragile components that continually make this a somewhat clunky system for doctors to work on. For those in the audience that are clinicians, one of our favorite things to do here at Sirona is, as we're watching you read in your current systems, look how long it takes to log into your systems when you start your day. If it takes, on average, by the way, that's sort of our findings in our little brief study, between 6 to 8 minutes on average to just log into your systems. By the way, I was talking to a customer yesterday, guys, that, no kidding, told me it was 15 minutes. You think about what happens in that 15 minutes. A lot of this infrastructure is coming together, getting logic sort of worked out, obviously logins that happen. All this is demonstrative, frankly, of the fragile nature of all these systems sort of coming together just to get the radiologist started. Now, that synchronization obviously has to maintain throughout the day. Otherwise, we potentially create single points of failure that happen in this stack. So one of the things we also sort of researched on our own here is that like 70% of radiologists in the audience probably read on more than two different systems, two or more, certainly. And in some cases, we see this number really exacerbated when you start thinking about this at the integrated delivery network level or the large health system level. Our friends at HCA, for example, we know have over 40 different IT stacks that they're working from. This is physicians who are potentially having their head spinning around. I'm looking at my friend Peter when I say this, head spinning around is sitting in the reading room. How many different systems do we have to work on? This notion of scaling profitably is going to be challenged just by the virtue of the fact that these physicians have to work on all these different systems. So with that, we think about this in the context of almost an actual clinical workflow. Andrew, I'd love to kind of get your voice on this one, if you don't mind, kind of talk a little bit about what a complex case might look like in today's environment.
Yeah, this is Maria, and this is just an exciting one to put up over the years of having worked in the space and not being able to put up a patient like this who is so complex, where we can start to help this workflow. And you all probably know this, especially the radiologists in the audience. When you see Maria on the work list, she has known CLI. Was initially diagnosed. She had multiple interventions in the past, multiple repeat imaging. And this is an interesting case, but one that's going to take a lot of time to really suss out. And she's presenting today with a CTA and a duplex ultrasound of the legs to see what's changed ultimately. So this is Dr. Toggles. He's, like Dr. Sachs or someone prior to Sirona. And these are all the questions. And I won't bore you reading this list, but there's a lot of clinical questions that need to be answered to address the clinical question of, is she worse today? Does she need another intervention? How can we help Maria? And obviously the time is clicking. The work list is backing up behind him. So if we go on to the next slide here, we'll see that this is ultimately a click through of the traditional workflow. He's going to search through PACS for relevant priors if they're available, open prior studies, adjust hanging protocol, compare current images, analyze the text sheet, transcribe technical details, synthesize the report, and finally draft the impression, and finalize the report and more. And this is more than 8+ toggles between systems. and a whole lot more clicks to support this workflow. And this is really where we feel deeply at Sirona that integrating AI throughout this workflow is the opportunity to help radiologists and their practices and the systems that they're support and ultimately patients to really make an impact on speed, efficiency, and quality versus being the person who's ultimately toggling back and forth, connecting these systems together. So I'll turn it back to JD. I know you want to talk a little bit about the data that's starting to come from different institutions on Gen AI.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Andrew, and it's super interesting, even like to think about the animation here of the doc's head just going back and forth, right? Looking at all these different systems. You have to empathize with that on a daily basis. It's certainly the more complex cases that our radiologists are dealing with in the world, right? Some of those simpler cases might be a little bit different, but some of the complex ones certainly are difficult. I think when we kind of start thinking about the data, guys, right? We've seen, and this is something I want to put out there, especially if I think one of our Northwestern friends who signed up for this webinar is actually joining us. But one thing to be clear, Sirona had nothing to do with what Northwestern had actually published last year in the Radiology Business Journal. But this study that they did was super interesting to us, primarily because they really, I think, as we understood it and look at it, it was not about imaging AI or pixel AI specifically. They really dug deeply into understanding what the radiologist works on a daily basis and started trying to figure out where some of the generative AI could actually make an impact on their workflow. And what came out of it was some really interesting results. By the way, guys, I don't mind telling you from some of the customers I've talked to, that 40% number seems crazy to them. But again, I think this is a very reliable source, regardless if the number is 15, 20, 30, 40, regardless, just squeezing out additional efficiency in the way that radiologists work going forward is hugely impactful, not just for them as individuals, but again, at that practice level. We keep coming back to this notion of an efficient business, an efficient team, a clinical team is a better clinical team, and therefore a more successful team ultimately in the context of the business that they're doing. And by the way, that quote on the right, this is before GE, of course, acquired Intelerad, but the fact that GE's CEO also, sort of acknowledges the need for dynamic and adaptive tools that increase productivity. That's really what I think our industry is talking quite a bit about these days. And it's something that gets us really excited because we've been building this for the better part of the last 7, 8 years or so. And we're very much now in a space where this is real and definitely worth, I think, everyone's time in seeing, even if you're not maybe a buyer today. It's absolutely worth taking a very long look at. I think this is the future of our industry. So again, we've already, knows you're here to talk about and who Sirona is. At the end of the day, very simply, we like to say that we are radiology untethered. We are a cloud native, unified AI-driven solution that we think can transform not just the radiology experience, but the business of imaging at large. There's a really new, a very interesting new set of parameters and the economics of our business that are actually shifting out there. Again, because of the notion of what cloud can truly deliver, we are a multi-tenant system. So you would find that we are a disruptively, not just a disruptively low cost, but a disruptively unique user experience overall. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. First, it's important to understand when I say radiology untethered, we mean quite literally reading for anyone, any institution from anywhere on nearly any device with the performance you would expect as if the server were right under your desk. This is what we have to promise in order to really deliver, I think, the next generation of the way these systems will be delivered and the way physicians will be able to work. Certainly with the amount of data that's flooding at them, this is critically important. We say nearly every device because it actually runs completely in the Google Chrome browser. There is no software to download. And again, I would say thanks Netflix and Amazon Prime, guys, because at the end of the day, we're streaming Mission Impossible 4K and larger, movies these days. Why not be able to stream the very complex and large images that come along with radiology as well? We start, of course, with this notion of the RadOS. Our product, I would say, at Sirona is the radiology operating system. It starts there because when you unify the data, all kinds of really interesting possibilities start to really surface. And I think we'll be able to spend a little bit of time kind of talking about some of those things. But being cloud native and unifying data really, like I said, can unlock some really interesting possibilities. Where we've started, really, frankly, is in what I would call table stakes in medical imaging. You have to deliver a powerful work list and workflow engine. You got to deliver that diagnostic viewer, of course. And now this idea of a completely integrated reporting system, dictation system, along with all of this in that web fashion where you're logging in, no VPNs required. You're able to log in and you're active in the system in less than 15 seconds. It's pretty compelling and interesting to see. But as I said, it's ready for what's next. And what's next, we'll be able to talk a little bit, I think, a little bit about today, guys. With that, obviously we need to kind of get into a little bit, start getting into some of the science of this. And with that, Dr. Drew, I'm going to ask you to take over a little bit here and kind of share this with the audience.
Yeah, thanks, John. So my job is helping out with the innovation at Sirona, and that has turned into a lot of trying to integrate AI into places where we find that it can help with workflow. As John kind of alluded to, a lot of the early excitement in AI and radiology was focused on finding cancer and detecting really hard to detect abnormalities, and that's still important, but that's not the current focus at Sirona. We'll likely end up partnering with folks who are actively doing that. But a lot of our emphasis now is on things like infrastructure, where we're working with AWS to help the same way that you stream a 4K movie, as John alluded to. We're using that to stream Tomo, right? It's a similar sort of challenge, but people we're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Where they've already been doing this for years and years, and we're using some of the same infrastructure to accomplish that. We're also using something we refer to as Seronalex, which is basically an ontology to understand the relationship between different types of data. One thing that's unique about Sirona is that we have both the reporter and the viewer and the work list. So where we have access to kind of all the data, and that allows us to have a lot of context on a given patient, right? And we understand radiology, how the data relates to to each other, and that helps us power things like hanging protocols. So lots of people in radiology have struggled with hanging protocols. We believe we've come up with a really novel solution to that by using the Sirona-Lex ontology to understand not just what is the study description for this, but what's the reason for study and how does that interact with what sorts of series you want to look at right when you open up that case. And having that complex understanding of the HL7 and the DICOM and the patient context helps inform the hanging protocols. Also within the application, as I said at the beginning, we're really focused on workflow specifically. So we can go into a lot more detail about these things if people are interested, but we're working on things to just help a couple of seconds here and there in some instances. So one example is prior summaries where we have access to the HL7, so we know all the prior reports within a given system, and we can summarize that and try to draw attention to anything that might help with, again, patient context. How are you going to interpret this patient's data? We also have auto impressions and focus mode, which is something I think we'll talk about in a little bit more detail later. But the idea of focus mode is kind of a new way of using reporting where hopefully you can focus on the images and just speak to the images rather than having to toggle back and forth between your viewer screen and your reporter screen. And that we're really excited about because we're using AI to sort of know, rather than you decide where does this text go, we decide where the text should go within a given template, given what you've said, right? We know a lot about what you've said. We know the context of the patient. We know what the template looks like. So it's not that difficult to figure out that when you say that there is a lung nodule, it goes in the lung section of your template. And then the final part there is third-party integration. So as I said, Sirona's, we're growing, but we're not that big, right? So we're not going to be the ones who are helping you find lung nodules, right? There are a lot of companies that are doing that, and we're really happy to integrate with them. And we're kind of uniquely situated to integrate with third parties because, again, we have our hands on all the data. And so integration with them is really pretty straightforward, right? So we can interact with both the reporter and the viewer, and so that means that when you have something from Cure AI, for instance, it should be integrated really readily in both the viewer and the reporter seamlessly. So That's a lot of details there. I thought it
Yeah.
might be useful in the next step to just show the actual application. So we have just a pre-recorded video. This just goes over like the high points about like what functionality is there. Let's move on to that slide.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Dr. Drew. I think at the end of the day, I think there's something really cool here. You're talking about data, you're talking about infrastructure and the normalization of data, right, regardless of those data sources. And I think about that through the lens of the reporting, which we'll kind of dive into a quick little demo here. This is really about taking an FDA level of scrutiny and bringing that FDA clearance all the way through to our reporting applications as well. I think this is really interesting to kind of talk about too. I'll show the video.
This is our work list that we make available through the application, which is fully customizable for your practice needs. On the left, you can see you have access to our public work list. You've got private work lists that can all be controlled through roles-based access securities. And then within the work list itself, we have customizable priorities where you could have multiple levels of stat or trauma, as well as some customizable tags to help drive additional workflows within the application. And that's really easy to build here and control to your practice needs. Then we move down into the patient jacket. One thing that you will see immediately is we use green throughout the application, green text to demonstrate any sort of AI tooling that we're running. So we have a prior summary here that's looking through all of the entire prior reports within our solution and extracting out relevant clinical findings to help the radiologist not have to go through every single one of those reports and identify those findings. What you'll see over on the viewer are a lot of colors, which are really intentional and help drive some connectivity across the platform so the radiologist knows exactly what they're looking at. So you'll see the primary study for today is always in blue, and then we've got an orange and a yellow or a purple, excuse me. And you see those across the chips, you see them surrounding the viewports. But more importantly, you see those tied back to your priors colors here on the relevant priors work patient jacket, as well as the chips that are inserted into the report. So you know exactly what you're looking at and where, and that they're all connected across the platform. So bringing you back over to the reporter, first thing you'll notice, we have access to all of your normal tools that you're used to in any legacy solutions. We've got merge fields, custom fields, nested content. You have all of your templates, your macros. We can easily get those imported from your existing solution into the Sirona solution for a seamless adoption into our application. One thing that I'm really, really proud of that in my previous experience, we really struggled to develop is that we are able, because we have the full stack and all of the data, we're able to insert the comparison studies and description dates for you from those hanging protocols within the viewer. So you don't have to dictate those dates and those descriptions. The last thing I want to point out here, just to really demonstrate the connectivity and that pixel-based reporting from the viewer into the reporter, is you'll see we've done an anatomic segmentation on an L spine. So you have all of your spine labels labeled for you automatically through our tool. But what's really, I think, an important note to mention is that we actually connect those into the reporter. So there's this bidirectional connectivity where we're taking the pixels and the images and connecting those into the reporting solution. And what's really, I think, what even demonstrates that even more is that I can click on one of these spine labels and you see it navigates you to that spine, to that level within the viewer. And those are all linked across priors as well. So it's a really exciting feature, just to kind of demonstrate, what we've implemented and where we're going in the future with additional anatomical segmentations. A couple of additional AI tools that I also want to point out. We do have a tool that is called Focus Mode, and that's something that we've developed to really help the radiologist keep their focus on the images, which is the most important area of the application for them to focus on, and just allows them to dictate freely in no structured way the findings that they're observing in that interpretation. And we will, through AI, place that into the correct anatomical structure within the report template. And then additionally, on top of that, we do have our own impression generation that's running through AI that will allow our users to either easily navigate or use a voice command to generate that impression. And those impressions can be fine-tuned to an individual, they can be fine-tuned to a clinic, or they can be fine-tuned to a subspecialty. So as part of our implementation, we'll identify our customers' needs in that area.
Great stuff. Really cool, without question. hopefully that overview I think is pretty solid. Andrew, I think it's obviously that's Nathan Ayers, by the way, our VP of Product Management, doing a great job of kind of demonstrating a little bit of the application. As we think about that in the context of back to Maria's case, how do we address that?
Yeah, just coming back to Maria here, layering on top of that context, a lot of this connectivity starts to layer to support a really cool workflow and sort of two paradigms that start to emerge. So, again, tying back to Maria, just to remind everyone, she's an older woman with CLI who has received the CTA and ultrasound today. And ultimately, these two paradigms here are workflow automation into the report and then speech to action, which I'll get to in a second. But the relevant priors are reliably hung to Trafton's point about our ontology driving hanging protocols. We have a prior reports and relevant findings are already summarized using AI and injected into the report. We have anatomical labeling connecting the images back to the report as well, the tech sheet data. And all that's left here for the physician is really to do a final review of the images and generate the report with AI assistance and an AI impression. And because this is all connected in one system, there's no more toggling or navigating between separate systems here. And this is speech to action, and what really where we're heading here, and really where we're very excited, is the ability to deploy agents ultimately across a connected system, like a resident, to do really complex analysis and with sort of if-then statements. And if you want to click one more time, JD, this is just an example of a question that could be asked. If there's history of CLI in the tibials, include the extent in the report and hang the associated images. So you see that report updating, you see the new prior hung and the update to the comparison field, and a little clot in the tibial artery there as well. So this is just really exciting, and I want to talk a little bit and open this up here and transition to Dr. Sachs and Dr. Drew. From a science perspective, Dr. Drew, I think access to DICOM is obviously really important in how we use that. There's so much data here. Do you want to touch a little bit on the data infrastructure that we have access to in a little bit more detail?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So DICOM is really important for helping drive workflow and make things more efficient. So the idea is that the system knows this context, and so it can automatically import this information rather than having to look it up. So that means that we have all sorts of merge fields that will carry over this information automatically. So we know what modality you're looking at. We know the study description. We know the patient age and sex. So that information should just automatically be added to the report, and that should be modifiable, right? So if you have a template, a certain situation where with these types of patients, we want to pull over this information, it should be pretty straightforward to add that information to the report automatically. I think that's sort of the starting point. In the next slide, we'll talk. Well, Peter or Dr. Sachs, do you want to talk about the DICOM alone, or you want to skip over to me? This is the more exciting part: is going into HL7 and EMR. What do you think, Dr. Sachs? Oh, I can't hear Dr. Sachs. Oh, yeah, I still can't hear it. Can you guys?
I cannot. No, sorry. Sometimes the earbuds don't work for you. I
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
I have personally, yeah.
Why don't you connect the dots on the data?
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Dr. Sachs.
Peter, I'm gonna talk about this stuff, and will join me when your audio works.
How about now?
So, oh, there
Oh,
you are. I just
Sorry
see
about that. Your
It's all
earbud
right.
malfunction. No, Traft, I think it'd be best if we wait till you power through this.
So, I'll introduce this stuff, and you'll talk about application. Okay. So, I was just saying, I think it's DICOM is a starting point, right? A lot of legacy systems have access to DICOM. One of the things that it starts to set Sirona apart, in my opinion, is having access to the HL7 and EMR. So that allows us to add more context to the patient. So one little detail that Nathan showed in that video before was the fact that when you open a comparison case, it automatically adds the comparison. And like it's not that much time to say, oh, I here's the comparison at this date. But if you do that in every single case, kind of adds up, and it feels like one of those things like, "Wow, why am I saying this? Like it's obvious, like it's right in front of you that I opened up this case. Why is it necessary with a modern solution? All that information is there. Why can't you do this for me?" And one of the exciting things, I mean, part of the reasons I joined Sirona was like when you're building from the ground up, you can sort of build it in such a way that I can access this information. It's right in front of us. We have our fingers on it. So it's just a matter of putting it forward. And it's a little bit more complicated than that because you don't want to pull in every single prior. You want to pull in the prior that's been actually hung and that you've actually examined, right? So you do need a little bit more context. It's not quite as simple as maybe I thought it was when I first saw this problem and first saw people just like constantly having to say the comparison each time. But that's the nice thing about having access to this information. So not only do we have access through the HL7 of what the prior reports are, but because we have access to what the user movements in the viewer, we know that they've actually hung that and that they've evaluated that image, and then we say, okay, now that's a comparison. Um, so that's an example of what we're doing with HL7. We're also working now on integrating the EMR. So EMR, when we talk about patient context, that's like, to me, probably the most important part of the patient context is this person a heavy smoker, right? Um, Knowing just their prior reports, you might not get that. But if you have access to HL7, then you can pull that information in and you might have that, maybe you put that in your report, or maybe you just want to know that as a radiologist so they can help you evaluate the images that you're looking at. That context is really important for understanding how concerned am I about, calcification I find in a lung scan. By putting all these things together, this is why we're saying a 360-degree patient data set is we're getting kind of all the information in one place under one umbrella rather than relying on the radiologists to connect the dots, right? One of the reasons I think the toggle metaphor is really useful is that it's kind of on the radiologists in a lot of legacy solutions to connect those dots. And so to look over here in the EMR and encode that information and put some of that in the report, but also have that in the back of your mind as you're interpreting the images. And it's all kind of on the radiologist. And Sirona is just trying to, by having access to all this information, we're trying to provide more patient context. So I think in the next slide, we're going to go into sort of one example of how this could work that Dr. Sachs had thought through a little bit. Oh yeah, so lung cancer screening. So
Sure.
Peter, so this is just kind of one illustration of the sort of high level things I was talking about before.
Yeah, thanks, Traft. And I want to start by saying that in my career as an imaging informaticist as well as a radiologist, I've been particularly interested in and focused on workflow. And one of the main reasons that it's been such a joy to work with Sirona is that this is really a marriage of reporting AI, pixel AI, and now agentic AI, and bringing all of that to my workflow to make me do a better job and a more efficient job doing what it is I'm trained to do. Um, and this is a real life example drawn from my experience as a thoracic radiologist, which is what I have done for a living. But I think it synthesizes what John, Andrew, and Trafton have said over the last half an hour and shows why a single integrated application platform and a unified data model can dramatically reduce the number of clicks and improve my quality of work. So upon opening a lung cancer screening case, now the first thing that's going to happen is the images are going to hang correctly right away, regardless of where they were acquired, because there are likely to be multiple priors from multiple places, and they may have different series naming conventions. So that problem is going to go away. And then in my reporting infrastructure, I'm going to be presented with the patient's smoking history, any relevant risk factors, and a cogent summary of the patient's prior reports. So I kind of know already what I'm looking for in my current examination. At that point, Pixel AI is going to help me out because nodules are automatically measured. And then sort of back to Pixel to reporting, those nodule measurements are going to be automatically inserted into my report with links to the images and compared to the prior measurements. So I don't have to go through the manual process of measuring everything, putting in my report, clicking around in my report to get it in the right place. I can then spend my time doing what else I'm supposed to be doing, which is looking at the images for any additional findings above and beyond the lung cancer screening nodule scenario. And because of focus mode, I can just free dictate as I go along and be confident that all of those findings are going to find their way into my report without me having to go click by click by click through my template. Um, and then finally, I'm going to get an impression, which is going to be generated with the correct lung-RAD score, and agentic AI may help me here by going out and querying the appropriate source for that information, and bring me back that lung-RAD score with any recommended follow-up, and perhaps even in the not too distant future, going ahead and scheduling those referrals and follow-up imaging studies for me. So that's kind of how I envision this. We can't necessarily do every single piece of this right now, but we have the platform to be able to do all of this.
Yeah, that's definitely the Rad OS in action. I'm just curious, Dr. Sachs, out of curious. I mean, I'm just dying of curiosity. Just your impression and your the way you're conceiving of this, in the context of the way rads are going to be working in the next, say 2, 3 years or so. How much efficiency does this gain? Obviously, it's hard to to nail it down in terms of a specific number, but when you think about this, where do you see like the most obvious ways to create some efficiency and time for the docs?
Well, practically, John, I still would be spending a lot of time jumping back and forth from looking at the images to looking at my reporter to then going over to the EMR to click on multiple sites within the EMR to get the information I need. Sometimes they're presented in a landing page, but I still have to spend, as you saw in our animation, a lot of time swiveling my head around and clicking to dig out that information. The other thing is that I do have to spend a fair amount of time clicking on the images to measure, clicking then on the report to make sure that I'm inserting the measurements by voice in the right place. So I can envision, and I don't have data for this at hand, but as you say, 10, 15, 20% savings in my time. And given the volume of studies we're being asked to read, which is ever increasing, and the shortage of radiologists, which is ever increasing, that 5, 10, 15, 20% time saving is huge. It's enormous.
Definitely. Definitely. Are there any other scenarios that sort of come to mind, just out of curiosity? That you've got painted the picture with lung cancer, which I think is a great one, and certainly lung nodules we know is something that is tedious for radiologists. Speaking as a guy who actually has lung nodules, by the way. But out of curiosity, what are some of the use cases, or other scenarios that sort of really play in, kind of dominate in your mind here?
Well, one that jumps forward is the management of scanned documents and complex tech worksheets. I didn't do musculoskeletal radiology, but my colleagues were absolutely tortured by dealing with DEXA scans, and being presented with a PDF printout that might be scanned into packs, but somehow wanting to get that into their report. Similarly, we have complex tech ultrasound worksheets, OB ultrasound, maternal fetal ultrasound, with a gazillion measurements. And there are some third-party applications which require a tremendous build, but with our agentic functionality, we're not in production yet, but we have seen successful demonstrations internally of importing all of that data into a report seamlessly and essentially within seconds. So I would see that as a dramatic step forward in workflow.
I just whenever people mention DEXA, I always remember we talked to a radiologist. I think it was RSNA this year who I've talked to before, but he's been thinking about this stuff as well, and he said DEXA was his white whale because it's just so annoying. And I had never really appreciated it until I started watching, standing over the shoulder of radiologists and watching them do it, and it's crazy. It's crazy how much time, how many numbers. And the other thing that we're finding is that in addition to you tend to focus on the amount of time you save by not dictating all those numbers, but dictating a lot of numbers is asking for errors. So you actually reduce the error rate significantly by doing this as well. And so I'm very excited about trying to take DEXA. I know a number of different practices where it's like you're the unlucky person who's responsible for doing the DEXAs, right? But like
Right.
I hope that that kind of flips because they should be really easy to read. There's really not a lot of interpretation with 99% of DEXAs. It's just like this slog of taking numbers and putting them, and that's not what radiologists should be spending their time doing, right? Like we know, as Peter has mentioned, and everybody knows, like more images, fewer radiologists, like something's got to give. And so the only, I mean, this is not a solution, but the only partial solution that we can come up with is just doing everything we can to make them more efficient. So DEXA is a place where I think there's a lot of promise there.
Yeah,
And
and quick context for that too. I mean, if I had a nickel for every customer I've talked to lately that talks about ultrasound. Peter, you kind of brought that up a little bit, but I think about what you were saying about DICOM and structured reporting and rich information that's in the images that's there, and obviously tech worksheets that have become a part of that ultrasound workflow. I mean, there's got to be significant use cases. Even back to Maria, Andrew, back to your example, there's got to be some significant value even in ultrasound cases too. No?
I would think so, and I would turn to Dr. Sachs. I don't know. Some of the fun conversations that I've had is these complex examples seem to me, and Dr. Sachs, this is going to be back to a question to you, seem to be the ones where so much value comes from the radiologist interpretation, right? With a code stroke, for example, where we know that there's a code stroke, and AI, for example, is only marginally helpful, but the deep interpretation of the numbers and the analysis of cancer to know if something's progressing, for example, or a nodule, for example. I'm wondering if this starts to change how you think about an amassing work list with complex patients as well, from a stress perspective.
I do have a comment. I think what you get at is that the analytic skills that we bring are often buried under the data management we need to do, moving images around, moving numbers around, clicking around, and the um, um, sort of unloading of the radiologist of the tedious components of managing the data, which end up being themselves stressful, but adding to the stress when then you have to uh, somewhat in a somewhat fatigued state, focus on exactly what you describe, which is providing the analysis. Um, it comes to mind, John, another scenario that sends chills down the spines of many radiologists is we get handed a list for a tumor board the day before a tumor board. And we get handed traditionally a stack of CDs, although hopefully those images are now electronically available, but they're generally from outside institutions. They have to get loaded into our system. With Sirona's technology, they get normalized, and then we can begin the process of not worrying so much about getting them to the file room and getting them loaded, but actually looking at them in a proper hanging protocol, and then have easy access to all the data we actually need to provide value to the tumor board, which includes a host of EMR data elements such as pathology, um,
Sure.
radiomics, genomics, prior treatment, and then can move on to looking at the images and doing having all of the comparison or much of the comparison work being done for us. Then we can bring our expertise to assisting with current staging, current treatment recommendations, and be really more part of the clinical team than just being grunts managing data elements on our own.
Yeah, no, it's exciting stuff, guys, and I appreciate it. I think we're going to certainly want to solicit some questions from the audience here a little bit too, but maybe let me kind of bring this into some level of closure here along the way. Such good, insight, I think, across the board into how intense data is, obviously, in what we do every day, and as in the radiology business, and in the context of what rads have to work with, it's just going to continue to grow. We've got to figure out that simplicity, and again, back to the theme of our webinar around reporting. How do we make the radiologist product just a little bit easier here to get to come to fruition, so to speak, right? So kind of bringing this into some level of closure across the board. Again, I'm not going to read slides to anyone by any stretch of the imagination, but we do think about this in a very disruptive way. When you come back to almost the way we started this conversation, guys, today, it really is about how do we increase efficiency? If we do increase efficiency, how can we make practices, RADs more profitable as a group, right? And providing the services that they do to the hospitals and the imaging centers, certainly that they're a part of. How do we future-proof this technology? Again, coming back to that RAD OS and knowing that more data for AI to ultimately grow and learn and develop around means that we can, by unifying that data, create a future-proof environment that is cloud delivered, right? That is incredibly disruptively low cost across the board, but can maintain that clinical trust, right? I mentioned kind of quickly about our FDA clearance on a reporting solution. We're the only ones of our kind that do that in this industry. We've gone that extra step because this is pixel-powered reporting. We've even had some customers refer to as pixel EMR. The idea that this is all coming together, it has to be clinically trusted. The change management that comes along with supporting the RADs in this new experience, is absolutely our obligation as a services organization in supporting this industry. And frankly, again, I've mentioned a couple times how disruptive this can ultimately be. There is a cost of waiting. We do know, of course, that there are systems that are going end of life in the market right now. I get often asked whether or not Sirona can provide our solution as a reporting-only application. We can. There's nothing wrong with certainly creating reporting as a modular solution. We still want access to those pixels, regardless of whether or not where your PACS on the front end or not. You're the one that looking at using our viewer or not. Those pixels are still incredibly invaluable and important to actually creating that reporting experience. We think is next level. We think it truly is going to set the industry in a whole new direction when it thinks about reporting. Don't think about reporting necessarily as another bolt-on to a legacy system that's going to take another, maybe shorten those login times, maybe from that average of 6 to 8 minutes. Maybe it shortens it to 2 or 3. It still should be very quick. It should be seamless to the users. And this unified experience, I think, is something I'm, of course, tremendously excited about. I probably, wear it on my sleeve across the board. But there is a disruption here in the context of how much this costs. When we think about a completely integrated environment, all the hardware, all the servers necessary to deliver this with performance, you do it at a fraction of the cost of just what a PAC system today costs. And in the context of reporting, fraction of the cost of what you're seeing from some of those bolt-on solutions that are still out there. Those tools that sort of recognize that there were some end-of-life applications coming. They got ahead of it. Great. They're employing AI to support some of that. It's still a bolt-on solution, and not necessarily sure it actually gets us all the way there. So with that, I think maybe we kind of open it up for some questions, and certainly I'll make sure that in closing everyone can access some content from Sirona. Obviously, welcome to join or see our website, but there's some neat tools here that the team's put together to schedule a demo or actually just download some of our content to share with some of your colleagues. So any questions out there that kind of came in, Andrew, while we were kind of chatting this up a little bit, or there questions kind of streaming in now? We're open to it.
There's a question here around referencing Northwestern and their data set. Any options for non-academic practices? Have we worked with Hopper or similar to support the workflow?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, yeah, first and foremost, again, I want to be very clear. We had nothing to do with the Northwestern study, right? Again, I'm highlighting that as an example of an academic institution that kind of really dug into the weeds, and we love that they did it, right? So it's a great story. We obviously haven't run that data for ourselves. I think the notion of doing this outside of academia, this is where we're in business. We've been doing this for, as I said, the product's been 7-8 years in the making. We've raised over $100 million venture capital to actually bring this to market. It is absolutely ready for prime time. As I've said, it's definitely worth, even if you're not an immediate buyer, it's definitely worth taking a look at and seeing. I think in the context of Hopper and other foundational models, anyone that sees that the incredible potential and value of where foundation models are going, bringing those into this mixture is almost as like us bringing Claude or Grok or GPT or Gemini or others, into this workflow, which is effectively what we do here. I do want to kind of almost, ask Dr. Drew to maybe kind of chime in a little bit on that answer too, in the context of foundation models, this workflow, and in the reporting context. Is there anything that kind of add around the way we think about bringing different AI models into this, not necessarily just the generative stuff, maybe some of the pixel stuff as well, to address the question?
Yeah, I mean it's an exciting time to have the Hoppers of the world doing this really amazing work that they're doing, right? And it's not just Hopper, right? So there are quite a few different players that are working on this. One piece of complexity there is FDA approval. I know that is it's makes my head hurt to think about all the different potential things you could find in a given scan, but they're actively working on different ways of doing this, and it could just be a suggestion to look at this rather than a diagnosis. But I think from Sirona's perspective, we're most interested in being a sort of an intermediary for that expertise, right? There are all these players that their entire business is based around this, and we can provide a really good platform for that, right? We're kind of a best case scenario because we have not just the pixels and not just the report, we have all of it, so we can integrate that together. We could potentially work together with them to have a first draft of a report, right? And then the radiologist can amend that as they see fit. But that we're not there yet, but we're set up in such a way that we could do that relatively easily and a lot more readily than some legacy vendors, I would say.
Yeah, I think you may have said something that really perked up some folks there. I think the notion of getting to the pre-read, right, or getting to a state where the doc opens the case and maybe part of the report is actually completed. That's I've heard from a lot of docs that's super super interesting to them. Anything else kind of pop through, Andrew,
Yeah,
that
there's a couple
answers your
additional
question?
questions coming through, and I appreciate all the activity in the chat. There's a question here which I can a couple questions which I'll do my best to sort of merge together and provide a little bit of my answer to, and then tee up to the group. And one which is around the ability to add outputs from additional AI, which I think we just talked to, into our solution. And then how different is this from Rad AI or Rad Pair, the other reporting solutions? And I think generally our foundation is as a unified platform is very different, which is what sets us apart as we do reporting, but we are growing the definition of reporting as a module to reporting as the entire workflow for a radiologist. So having access to those pictures, the pixels, the entire data set is what we believe drives reporting with sort of a big R as the entire workflow. So all of the data from the pixels, the EMR, the HL7 data around prior reports start to drive a lot of automation. I like to think of it above the impression line for some compared to some of those other technologies. And JD, I don't know if you want to jump in on that, but I'll also tack on another question too.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about cloud nativity. There's a question here around, are we only aimed at the teleradiology community, and how does this compare to sort of practice with the performance from practices that have it under their desk? There's another question.
Yeah, no, it's a really insightful question actually, because it does sort of almost jump right automatically to this. This is a phenomenal teleradiology type of application. We're designing and building this application to be a universal PAC system in any environment across the board. When I think about the economics of what we're doing, Andrew, at the end of the day, it does lend itself to some really interesting business models and business opportunities. Rad groups who want to provide PACs to hospitals. We see that very dramatically today. We see hospitals interested in having a teleradiology platform, but potentially working with other rad groups, other subspecialists that may not be readily available to them in some of their nearby geography. When you think about this notion of radiology untethered, it's really, well, gosh, if we are unifying the data, serving it up, frankly, in the infrastructure that is all AWS, and by the way, incredibly performant and incredibly redundant, I think the idea of stretching where this can go and how this goes really is up to the interpretation of the business who's really interested in kind of driving this forward. We've seen a lot of radiologists not leave their practices to retire, but actually splinter off and actually go start their own groups because there is so much demand out there for this expertise. And the idea that you can access and build a system for yourselves very, very quickly, potentially either supplement your existing systems with this as call it a business continuity application or a migration to cloud storage, or to get back to the notion of reporting and putting this together in the context of actually supporting the workflow from a radiologist output in reporting. There's so much flexibility here. It's frankly one of the most exciting things about actually doing what we do every day. As I said, I started with how long I've been in this industry. PACS did not become interesting again, I would say, to me, and just in the last couple of years since Sirona kind of came on the scene, and what we're doing and I think where this goes, and not necessarily just Sirona. There's a ton of opportunity out there to look at this and say we can solve the problem of in a new way to change your job. So I answers it. I don't tell a radiology platform obvious for the possible nearly we can twist and turn it.
I think we might be losing you, John. I'm not sure if that was just me.
I was losing him for a little bit there too. Yeah, he's fully frozen.
Okay.
No.
He's fully frozen, but it's a good snapshot. There's been some funny ones over time. Well, I think with that, we've really we've answered most of the questions in the chat and want to be sensitive to everyone's time today. And want to thank everybody for joining. Please reach out with any additional questions. We would love to have additional conversations, show you the application, get your hands on a sandbox. It's something we are able to do very easily, given the cloud nativity of the platform, and look forward to interacting with all of you at different conferences and events through the season ultimately. So thank you again so much. John, it looks like you're back. I don't know if anyone else
Yeah, I'm
wants to
sorry
say
about
anything in closing,
that.
but we got most of it.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Thanks again for everyone for joining. Really appreciate it. Hope to see you on the other side.
Thanks.